During the events of Part 8, there are more than a few major inconsistencies with the story and Jason himself. The first being the location of Crystal Lake, suddenly having access to a large enough body of water to sail to New York, and how he made it to the cruise ship instead of staying home, which has been his goal since Part 6. Not only did Jason stay on the boat long after it set sail, he even followed the characters to New York itself, where he chased the survivors down and killed them one by one until meeting his defeat. Jason has been shown to hunt down people outside the campgrounds before, like in Part 2 when he hunted Alice to an apartment she had recently moved into in an attempt to get over the events of Part 1, stabbing her in the temple and bringing her body back to his shack. But never has he ever strayed that far for some would-be victims that never entered anywhere near the campground without someone leading him back to the others. And they certainly never did anything that would anger Jason so much that he would travel to New York to kill them. Unless you go by my last theory of Jason searching for his mother's head, but I find this unlikely that this is the case since Jason in Part 8 is solely hunting and only fixated on the characters from the boat. Next is the main character Rennie. She supposedly has a history with Jason. During a flashback, it's shown that Rennie was almost pulled under the water of Crystal Lake and drowned by Jason during a moment when her uncle was trying to teach her to swim and pushing her overboard from their boat after telling her about Jason drowning as motivation. The only problem with this scene is the obvious age difference between the characters. Jason and Rennie are depicted as children, when at this point in the timeline, Jason would have been full grown, and judging by Rennie's appearance, along with her uncle's, this would have likely taken place after Part 6, probably around the time Tina Shepard killed her father. So if that's the case, then how was Rennie seeing a young Jason pulling her underwater? Rennie's hallucinations are very inconsistent. At times we see Jason as a normal-looking kid, even in the flashback at the beginning, where we're giving a quick, loose retelling of the story, and in others, he looks more like he should, with his deformities. This gives me the impression that Jason drowning is what altered his appearance, which contradicts the flashback scene Pamela has in Part 1 when Jason is seen screaming for help and obviously deformed. Next is the timeline. In the beginning of the film, Jim tells his girlfriend Susie that Jason drowned in Crystal Lake about 30 years ago, which would place the year in or around 1987, which, going by the timeline set in the movies, this would be impossible. The first movie takes place in 1979. Then, 5 years pass before the events of Parts 2, 3, and 4 take place in 1984. Then it's supposed to be around another 5 years or so after that, before the events of Part 5 take place, roughly putting it around 1989. This already takes us past the events of Part 8, before cycling through parts of 6 and 7, which both have their own time jumps as well, making this movie impossible to place as a sequel. And last, this is the weirdest part for me, since it literally has no place in this or any other Friday the 13th movie at all. In the end, Jason is given a weakness to toxic waste and melts Jason back down to a child, which again has no deformities and looks pretty fresh for being a kid that supposedly died in 1957. As Jason dies, a bolt of lightning strikes the Statue of Liberty, and we are left with the two survivors reuniting with their dog, and the movie ends, with no mention of Jason's body and no payoff for the lightning strike. It's a lot to try to make sense of, but the only way I can see this working is if this is actually a work of fiction by Rennie herself. My theory is that she may have been a writer, as evidenced when she is gifted with a pen that is said to have belonged to Stephen King in high school, making it likely that she gravitates more towards horror. So once the SS Lazarus murders begin, it's likely that Rennie uses this as motivation, only needing a face to go with the terror. While it's likely that it was a member of the ship's crew that was the actual killer, Rennie would have ultimately decided that replacing him with Jason would probably be a better fit for her story, since judging by the year stated in the movie, could have been around the events of Part 5, and possibly seeing the panic people had about Jason possibly returning from the grave and attacking Pinehurst, only to be deflated by Roy Burns being revealed to have been impersonating him the whole time. The ship would eventually sink, taking all the evidence of the actual killer with it. This would fuel Rennie further to write her piece as a survivor's tale and add to the legend of Jason Voorhees. This explains why there's so many inconsistencies in the movie, why the dates are wrong as a sequel, and why Rennie is seeing so many different versions of Jason as a child. My theory is that Rennie has no ties to Jason at all. She's just a kid who heard the same campfire stories like Paul told in Part 2, which is why Jim's story almost mirrors that in the beginning of Part 8. At this point, Jason would still be buried, waiting for the events of Part 6 to happen. Part 8 overall could have been the birth of an alternate fictional timeline in the Friday the 13th series, in which Rennie would milk her success with her story of Jason and create others, namely Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X, and Freddy vs. Jason, which would make sense since none of those movies hold the actual Friday the 13th title. I would also incorporate the events depicted in the Tommy tapes and Friday the 13th the game to bring Tommy back, as he would be paranoid about Jason's return. Having read Rennie's story and taking it as a real-life account, having Tommy escape and accidentally bringing Jason back again, this time possibly resulting in Tommy's death, in which Rennie could make another appearance and truly come face to face with Jason as he would drag her into the lake, killing her, and finally returning to his ruined shack and begin to rebuild his altar as he prepares to search for his mother again. That's pretty much my theory for today. If you have any theories of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments below or even comment on this theory. And as always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as well as hitting the notification bell to be alerted whenever another Dark Theory video is released. I am JG Dark, and thanks for watching.